My belief is that, when you have a longing in your soul to go and live a particular kind of life, and you might not even be consciously aware of it, life will join you. Life will cooperate with you to steer you to that point.
That was Sarah Wilson, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and internationally, and their continuing connection to culture, community, land, sea and sky. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and future.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, and in this podcast series I'll be uncovering the world of regenerative agriculture, its people, practices and principles, and empowering you to apply their learnings and experience to your business and life. I'm an 8th generational Australian farmer who transitioned my family farm from industrial methods to holistic regenerative practices. Join me as I dive deep into the regenerative journeys of other farmers, chefs, health practitioners and anyone else who's up for a yarn, and find out why and how they transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with Charlie Arnott.
G'day, very excited to share this episode with you. It's with Sarah Wilson, the journalist, TV presenter, blogger, media consultant, and prolific author. I was lucky to catch up with her in Sydney and in her natural habitat, as it were. We talked about anxiety, we talked about the connection of regenerative agriculture to health. We talked about nature being the antidote to so many of our human health-based problems, and she's also the author of two most recent books. First, We Make the Beast Beautiful, and released only a couple of weeks ago, this One Wild and Precious Life, a hopeful path forward in a fractured world. A wonderful woman who is so insightful, so many life experiences she shares in her books and also shares with us today. So enjoy this wonderful interview with Sarah Wilson. Hello, Sarah Wilson. Welcome to your living room. No, what room are we in?
This is actually my study. It's in sort of yoga room and room for when my very large extended family come to stay.
They bunker down.
They bunker down. They bring swags, literally.
Good country people bring swags.
Yep. On the train.
Really good. The Canberra to Central.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. We used to do the train with from boarding school back to Yass in the days of dog boxes, where there used to be, the corridors down the side, and the cabins, and there'd be seating, and there's 6 or 8 to a cabin, and you'd be up in the luggage compartment and just lots of bad behaviour. But that was a long time ago.
Always reminds me of an Agatha Christie movie.
Yes.
They always happened in those kind of...
Yeah, the conductor and was it Mr... Well, that was the Cluedo, wasn't
Poirot.
it? That's it, Mr. Poirot. Agatha Christie. Not Enid Blyton. So, Sarah, tell me where we are and why are you here?
Why do I live here?
Yeah.
That's a good question. We're currently in Bondi, quite close to the beach. We're looking out over North Bondi. I'm in an apartment on the top floor. And it's actually really quite a nice vista. It's across the top of trees, and my apartment building backs onto sort of this strip of trees and lots of fig trees and palms. And it's a channel that goes from the beach winds all the way down to Hyde Park. So the bird life fly sort of from Hyde Park, right from the harbour, all the way back up here. So
because it goes from here to Rose Bay, is that the one?
Yeah, up and over. Was it called that park, that Cooper Park and all of that?
Bellevue Hill there.
So there's this continuous tree line. So
you know what that's called? It's called a corridor of green.
I think you're right, a corridor. I like that, a green corridor. So and I'm just, as you know, about 100 metres from the water. So I chose to live here when I finally stopped backpacking around the world. That was 8 years of carrying one bag around the world. And when I finally decided to live somewhere and get real life adult furniture, I figured I should live somewhere where I'm going to be in nature. So this is as close as I could get to it while living in a very, very busy city. So you can see from my wet hair, I snuck in a afternoon swim, like literally a jump in the ocean. Right. It's pretty cold.
I turned up and there was no one here.
No, don't tell anyone I left the door open.
In this undisclosed address.
Yes, that's I've described fairly accurately.
When we say Bondi, we meant Balmain.
Yeah. So look, I ended up here because it was an experiment, like everything I do in life. After travelling around with sort of what ended up being one backpack, I thought I should try settling. Do what you're not doing is one of my many mottos. And so I needed to be in nature. I need to see a horizon, and we're kind of almost looking at one. There's I need space. I need to be in nature to feel that there's meaning in my life, or more accurately, so that I can connect to meaning. So being in nature actually takes me straight into, like a portal, like a green corridor, into what matters. Yeah, so that's why I chose here. I know this is going to sound a bit woo-woo, but I feel the water in Bondi, and I've lived in different areas around the world and sought out ocean water. I feel that the water here has an energy that is really effervescent. It brings me back to life in an instant. I find it very, very healing. And I don't know what it is. It's just something that I feel and always have felt. So, yeah.
It's a wonderful part of the world, and you've certainly picked a ripper spot because you do have a corridor of green right in front of you. We have a horizon. You are near the water, and there is a beautiful buzz. There's extremes of Bondi, isn't there? But was coming back here were you growing up? Did you come back here? Or you putting on your big girl's pants?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of that in my mid-40s. It was a little bit of that. There was also a desire to connect to humanity. So I'm a lone operator. I go out into the world and I venture forth and I go and seek out my connections. And that has worked in many ways. And I've had a wonderful, wonderful life, and I have a wonderful, wonderful life. But what I've kind of not perfected is the art of intimate relationships, sort of being present long enough with neighbours and a sense of community where people know to find me and they can say, can you look after the kids for a couple of hours? Or, my nephews and nieces and my brothers and their partners can come and stay, and I've got a base where they can be with me. So I needed to try that out. As you can see from my intricately decorated apartment here, I still haven't perfected the art of furnishing.
What's that? Is that Percy the plant? What's that? Freddie the fern? It's not a fern, is it?
Is it a fiddle palm or something they call it? Anyway, it's an air purifier.
I got it subtropical.
Yeah, like everything in here, every single thing you can see is secondhand. So I got that from eBay. I got a bunch of plants. There's plants all over the place, and they're all from eBay. Most of the furniture rugs are either from Facebook Marketplace, eBay, or the street.
Good on you.
So,
I'm a street scavenger as well.
So nothing's new. So that was a little bit of a challenge, especially when it came to white goods. I'd never bought white goods in my life. I was 44, and so.
Well, you just esky girl. That was it.
An esky.
Esky. That's it.
No, I'd sort of
chili bug.
Chili bun. I just sort of managed to get by. I'd either lived with people, I lived in houses, Airbnbs. Yeah.
So I'm so off target right now.
Yeah,
there's nowhere near where we're going to go. No, I got one more thing to throw at you. So that's fascinating. So going out to other communities in the world and travelling and be part of that for a week or a month or whatever period of time, what you're doing is you're bringing all that back to this community in some way. It might be a gesture, it might be a word, it might be a behaviour. That's a wonderful thing.
Or just some weirdness.
Totally. I mean, every community needs a couple of...
An esoteric spinster wandering around the streets.
I wouldn't say that. Come on.
Well, I think there's a certain element of that. I think a woman in her 40s who hasn't sort of ticked off certain boxes.
All of the expected life goals.
Yeah, I get feedback from the community I now find myself in that, that strikes some people as sort of almost odd. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, they can that's what I reckon. Hey,
I interpret odd as not necessarily bad.
No. That's it. That's the spice of that bringing that variety and getting people to think about it. And then they've got that choice to judge or not.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Now, talking about lovely people, we didn't actually talk about lovely people, but I'm going to talk about a lovely person.
You're going to create a segue where there isn't one.
Did that work? Nico Plowman.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Your cousin.
My cousin, lovely fella, I went to school with when I was a little chappie, and went our separate ways doing stuff everywhere and all sorts of things. And through, how was it? Just a couple of years ago, we reconnected. We bumped into each other a few times, and Conscious Club.
Yeah.
That's where I saw him some years ago and hadn't for many years. And good buddy of yours, and we met just up the road some months ago with Nico.
Yeah. So Nico, funnily enough, we connected in an airport in LA, funnily enough, in a customs line, that very long customs line. But in fact, we connected properly, I believe, at Conscious Club as well. I was speaking at the Conscious Club.
Yep.
And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about.
Give it a plug.
Yeah, it's I don't think it's operating anymore, but my meditation teacher who also, did he teach you? Did Tim teach you?
No, but one of his students taught me.
Okay. Yeah. And he taught Nico to become a teacher.
Now, who is he?
Tim Brown.
Tim Brown
taught me to meditate probably over 10 years ago now. And I was invited, and he ran the Conscious Club, and then I was invited to speak at this, and Nico happened to be in the audience. And I think he was just starting his meditation journey. And so we connected from that, and I don't know, we just became friends. And in fact, we became friends because at the time he was living in the south of France and Paris. They'd moved overseas, he and his kids had moved overseas, and I joined them in Paris, and then I just stayed in touch. I was in Greece going through stuff over there, and he was going through stuff somewhere else, and we'd ring each other. We've been, he and I would describe as soulful friends, it's almost brother or sisterly in some ways.
He speaks of you very fondly. I can say that because I just did anyway, didn't I?
Yeah.
No, with all sincerity.
It's your podcast. You can say whatever you want.
I can swear. But that's the essence of Nico, and we pumped up his tyres a bit, but for good reason, because probably if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be sitting here. He made that wonderful connection.
Yeah.
And Tim Brown, who I spoke with the other day, he and we reckon there's some stuff we can do together in the regenerative ag space, which is where we keep circling around.
He's been Zach Bushed.
He has been totally bushed over, which is fantastic. No, we did chat about that the other day.
If you're going to be completely overwhelmed by something or fascinated or develop a intellectual or spiritual crush, Zach's not a bad one to focus it onto.
He's fantastic. I did some work with Zach in Melbourne in March when he was just before all the shit went down with COVID and so on. And what a lovely fella, and what a compelling.
He's channeling something, isn't he?
Totally.
He's really channeling something. And I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners have listened to Zach. I just feel, he's got incredible knowledge. That brain is unbelievable.
He's a freak.
However, he's also got a presence with it all, and I feel that he very much feels on a mission. he's in some sort of dharmic flow, and what I also like about him, I think that he speaks very purely, and he talks on different platforms. I was talking to Tim about this. I sometimes get concerned about some of the podcasts he'll appear on. Some of them are a bit extremist. I would personally be cautious about being associated with the host or the audience that podcast has attracted. But he doesn't seem to have that filter. And Tim's response was he just makes himself available and he goes into whatever forum he might be invited to and he speaks his truth. And in fact, that's right. I think he just holds his own. He holds his own. He's, so I think that's really impressive, especially in this era where people are very quick to shout down anyone with ideas that are anything even just a few millimetres left of centre. He
is totally focused and he's compelled to make a change, and he's got his Farmer's Footprint campaign and I'm sort of looking to help roll out some Project Biome stuff here in Australia. Farmer's Footprint in Australia. So there's lots of really exciting things and what a great guy to sort of focus this attention on. So we'll put things in the show notes and so on.
Yeah.
Now, let's get back on track.
Mm-hmm.
By no means the boring stuff because this is the gold. So Regenerative Journey, the podcast, I'm interested to understand your regenerative journey, Sarah, and from what I know, your regenerative journey, in some sense, started from day one. Just your lifestyle, I guess, and your the way you were and how your family was in the world. Without preempting anything, I just want to just say that's quite a given the interviewees I've had, that's an interesting starting point.
Yeah, I suppose it is in many ways. Just to fill in the gaps there, I sort of grew up in a family who were thinkers, I suppose, and questioners, not particularly exposed to opportunities, and certainly came from, how can I say, probably some sort of disadvantage. But they made the most of things, and my father in particular questioned things. And I'm one of 6 kids, I'm the eldest of 6 kids, and when I was 6, Dad moved us out to the country. He, partly because they couldn't afford to live in town, and he found land that was really cheap and bought a house from second-hand materials, or he built it. And we had goats for milk and meat. We had a vegetable garden, which was not entirely successful because it was a drought. Pretty much everything died. And we lived a very simple lifestyle. Now, it wasn't informed by biodynamic farming ideas or any kind of sort of sustainable principles per se. It was really guided by necessity. So it was sort of, really quite, it was kind of almost like of an era 2 generations ago, So it was really simple, not a lot of money floating around, and we just had to make do. So that's kind of what dictated it.
And that was normal?
That was normal. Well, it was normal for our family, yeah. As I sort of got to high school, so we went to a country primary school, then I commuted into Canberra for high school, and then I became a little bit more aware of how it wasn't normal. And however, I probably rebelled against some of the thinking around my upbringing, however maintained very much the sustainable minimalist principles. So
when you say rebelled, what so you're a bit of a pushback, like, because you had a reference point now, like there was home.
My father used to call me the little capitalist. So do you remember that show, The Good Life?
Yeah,
and
totally.
How Penelope Keith was a neighbour that would just keep an eye on them and just tell them where they were all going wrong.
That's
Dad
right,
called me Penelope Keith.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I would just point out to Mum and Dad that this was not working, that we needed to do this and this. And eventually when I was 16, I highlighted to Mum and Dad that we could no longer live out where we were living because we couldn't afford the water to fill the tanks that were now empty. So we sold up and moved into Canberra. Within weeks of me pronouncing this, Penelope Keith pronouncing
you
this.
ordained that was to happen.
Yeah. So
well, that's interesting because given that's what you said and that's what the family then did. They must have thought you had some value to the conversation.
Yes. Well, so that probably gives you an indication of my level of ambition and so on. So yes, I suppose I came from that background. I didn't swerve away from it, but I probably went off in all kinds of directions. So, you know, I got very ambitious, and I loved school, and I loved university, and then I travelled very young. I worked from a very young age, and I probably did a bunch of things that scared the living daylights out of my parents. And so from a young age, I sort of moved on from my family. And then I had this weird sort of period from my early 20s through to my early 30s, where I joined the other side, the dark side. So I worked for Rupert Murdoch. I did my cadetship with the Herald Sun, which was an incredible experience. I shared an opinion page with Andrew Bolt on a Friday. So I was 23.
Bolster.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think I was very...
Did you really share it? Was it 50-50?
He had the top half of the page and I had the bottom half of the page.
How rude. You should have had the top half.
I was 23.
Yeah, but
I was a counterpoint. I was a convenient
if
counterpoint.
he had been chivalrous, he might have said, Sarah, you can have the top half.
No, I don't think he's got that in him. So I was a female, left-wing, young, feminist voice. So I ticked off a bunch of boxes, and there they plonked me. So that was fantastic. And then, of course, at 29, I became the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, a veritable Bible of consumption. Now, I still maintain my principles. So I still wore secondhand stuff. I rode a bike to work. I didn't accept handbags and all the various gifts and things like that. I had a policy against that. So, you know, I sort of hung on to my roots. It was tough at times. And then MasterChef happened. And again, by that stage, I was in my mid-30s and I'd started to get unwell. And this is where we get to sort of the theme of this part of your podcast. You know, it generally takes a slap down for those of us who've done a very big pivot in life to do that pivot, you know. And so
Tension event.
Yes, that's right. And so mine came, or Deus Ex Machina, you know. Mine came in my mid-30s. I was at Cosmo and I developed an autoimmune disease, and a lot of people probably know this story by now, but it really, really knocked me about, and I got very, very unwell, and I was forced to stop and pull back from everything. And I was really stripped bare, Charlie. Like, you know, I was stripped of just, you know, all my identity around being the editor of Cosmo, living in Sydney, living a particular life. It was fast-paced. It was coffee in the morning, lots of alcohol at night. I had a very destructive boyfriend at the time who fitted that whole picture. And I ran myself into the ground. And my belief is, and I think I'm talking to a community here who understand this language or appreciate it, my belief is that, you know, when you have a longing in your soul to go and live a particular kind of life, and you might not even be consciously aware of it, life will join you. Life will cooperate with you to steer you to that point. And often, if you're an A-type, and it's often us A-types, I don't know if you're an A-type, you seem a bit more chilled than that. Farming's probably...
I'm a Z-type.
Yeah. Soil has pulled you back from the A front line. But you often need something quite physical to happen to you.
Yeah,
and
jolt.
A real jolt. And look, this community is full of stories like mine. Mine is not an exception at all. So in my case, I got the perfect disease. It was Hashimoto's disease, which is a thyroid disease which just really drags you down and just gets your ego and just kind of scrapes it through the mud, you know. So you put on weight, you lose your hair, your nails fall off, you go through premature menopause, you can't have children, you know.
So it's a real, it screws pretty much everything.
Can't work. So everything, if you've got an A-type, egoic, vain kind of lifestyle and setup, it just kind of shatters that. So it was the perfect disease for the life I was leading.
Just on that, that, you know, life can lead you to a point that you need to get to then change to, you know, head down towards your purpose or whatever, however you want to frame that up. And there's a school of thought which is similar to that your body is the thing that goes, you know what, you got to learn a lesson, and I've actually got to shut myself down so you learn. And a very small example of that is the flu, right? People get the flu in winter, yes, but what's winter after? Winter is after, you know, summer and autumn, when we're running 100 miles an hour, the days are long. We get to winter, we're we're shattered, you know, and our body's going.
We should be hibernating.
Totally, yeah. We should be going to bed when the sun goes down and so on. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that the body is the all-commanding, you know, entity, and just goes, you know what, you're not listening. You know, I gave you a little cold last week. You didn't listen. I'm going to floor you. I'm going to put you in bed with a flu so you just pipe down, shut up and get better.
It's the interface with life, with the rest of life, you know. It's how we communicate and receive messages and join the flow of life, you know. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think we're talking exactly the same language, whether it's life or whether it's our bodies. Our bodies are receiving that information.
It's not a coincidence.
No, it's certainly not a coincidence, and in fact it's mostly perfect.
Totally.
So that was my sort of moment, and what that did was realign me. And look, there's a really great Jungian psychologist called James Hollis, and again, I can provide the details if people want these notes. But
we will have a long list of show notes,
yes,
definitely.
Yeah, and he is an incredible voice, and if you can get hold of some of his books, you'll find them really, really wonderful. But he has a wonderful phrase, and I actually write a fair bit about it. I interview him in my next book, and he says, at some point, if you are off track, your soul will make an appointment for you with life. And
Nice.
all you've got to do is show up. Now, if you ignore the reminder, the tap on the shoulder, it will present things that become more and more violent, essentially,
Yep.
and usually through our bodies. You know, so I got a few reminders, calendar requests, and then I ignored them, and they weren't quite loud enough, and they got louder and louder, and then bam, down I went. And
Does that message sometimes come in the form of people?
I think so, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it can be quite subtle.
Turn up.
Yeah, and as an example, just to sort of bring back in Tim Brown and all of that, at the brink of all of this, when I was at my absolute worst point, I managed to, and I could barely walk at this stage, but I managed to get down to the beach, just to bring it again full circle, to just literally 100 metres down the road. And it was about 5 a.m. I hadn't slept all night. The sun had come up and I thought I'd go down to the beach. And I got down there and there was a guy who came up to me and he saw me and he just said, "You're not right, are you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You need to go and see Tim Brown." I said, "Oh God, who is this Tim Brown? You're the third person who's mentioned it." And I'd made a commitment to myself that in the absence of any other framework for how to live any longer on this planet, if I hear a mention of something 3 times in a row, I must act. So I hauled my sad sack of bones and sort of decrepit immune system to Tim Brown's studio in Paddington. And I literally showed up and I went, all right, I've got a 3 strikes and I have to act rule. And so here I am.
Make it good, Tim.
Yeah, and I'll get Tim to confirm this story for you. But I presented myself and just said, now listen, I have got a prejudice against you. And he said,
Tell us what you really think.
yeah, he said, and I said, well, I just feel really judged and blah, blah, blah. I had all this stuff on my shoulders, you know, and he said, he just laughed, you know, that chuckle of his, and he just said, meditation will help with that. So I was very resistant, but I knew I had to do it. So anyway, that was the meditation was a big part of my shift. It was being stripped bare and then left with nothing. I could no longer afford to live in Sydney. So I moved up to Byron Bay and everything had been reduced down to the 2 suitcases that I mentioned before. And then the rest of my life started. So I had to heal myself. I had no money. I wrote a column for a newspaper and it was about how to get well. I thought, kill a few birds with the one stone. And so I survived off this 1 column a week that I wrote, and I went on this massive adventure interviewing all kinds of people. And of course, one week I was without a topic, and so I wrote about how to quit sugar. And from there it just evolved and, you know, emerged and layers and ebooks, and then it became a book and then a digital platform. And
You hit a nerve. You know?
Yeah.
I was interviewing Dr. Wrong earlier today, and he,
my dentist, which is a nice segue from talking about sugar.
Yeah, totally. This is it. And he said, I said I was coming to see you after him, and he said that what dentistry couldn't do in 60 years, you did in a couple of years. In terms of
very generous.
Yeah, no, he's a lovely guy, and he very sincere he was, and we had a little quick chat about it's what resonates with people. Maybe hearing it from a guy who's going to make money out of you, actually it's the other way around, isn't it? If you don't stop eating sugar, you're not going to go to the dentist. But it's from a doctor guy. It's like, oh no, you hurt me every 3 months. I'm not going to listen to you. And then you struck a chord, in that very articulate way, and in also a very accessible way, So
all those years of working for News Limited and Cosmopolitan.
Totally, you had the strategy.
How to make quitting something that you are addicted to, you absolutely love. Life is defined. Joy, birthday celebration is defined by how to make it sexy. Give it to the former editor of Cosmopolitan.
That's it, and you did it. So. Tell me where, because we can talk about your journey those 8 years or up to this point, but I'm not going to, because I want to talk to you. I want to ask about regenerative ag. Where did that? Not that this is all about regenerative ag, this whole podcast thing, but it's it sits in the middle of so many things. And we connected around this, and Nico said, I reckon you should, and got us chatting. Where do you see it fitting into the world, as in the importance or significance of it, and also I'm priming you up because I'm going to give you some jobs later. Yeah. Where do you see yourself fitting into that, if at all? I mean, I'm no pressure.
Yeah, no. I mean, you've got something lined up, but I'll try to slot into it. I started to go down that rabbit hole, and I'm not sure. Exactly. It was Joel Sultan. Yeah. I remember watching a documentary with him in it. One of the very earliest ones. Yeah. I think it might have even been something before Food Inc.
Okay.
I think it might have been via Dr. Chris Kresser and his sort of, and that sort of world.
Yeah.
And I just, I was aware of how off kilter we were with our food system, and how much really basic logic we'd managed to disrupt. So we've created what's called, they're now referring to these things as hypernormal problems that are so complex and systemic and, if I can use this word, clusterfucked by layers and layers of ridiculous logic, right? That we then feel that the solution is going to have to be overly complex and multi-layered.
What was that called again? It was
hypernormal.
That's kind of
hypernormal. It's a hard. Yeah, there's a bunch of words that have been emerging from various thinkers over the years, in economics theory and a bunch of like black swans and all of that kind of thing, to describe the complexity that the world now faces. But, and I think Zach Bush is probably one of the best for sort of peeling back the layers of the onion and showing that many roads lead from that original kernel, and that is the way that we produce our food. And that there's a great deal of simplicity to what could be a fix to a number of problems, So with the sugar journey, for instance, I would often drill things back, and everybody wanted to get me on various aspects of the science and food.
When I mean get you as in trying debunk it or something.
You're getting rid of an entire food group. Well, fructose is not a food group.
What about the pyramid?
Yeah.
The food pyramid.
Sugar is natural. Well, so is arsenic. Are we meant to eat it in vast...
Cyanide.
Yeah, cyanide. Are we meant to eat like petroleum? Are we meant to eat vast quantities of it? Probably not. Anyway, so on and on it went. And but, what I would drill it back to is, well, when you cut out sugar, you essentially cut out processed food, because 80 to 90% of all processed food contains added sugar. So when you cut out processed food, what does that leave you with? Oh, real food. And what do you have to do then? Oh, you've got to learn to cook it. And so when you learn to cook it, you then get involved in the process of choosing good quality ingredients, and you actually think about how you're going to store it in your fridge. You start to think about that, and then you start to notice, oh, okay, well, some foods are better off buying organic because they do last longer, which means they become more efficient and cheaper in the long run. And then you work out a bunch of other things like, well, if you invest in an organic chicken as opposed to, free range, et cetera, well, you get more bang for your buck in the end, because then you can boil the bones and make stock. And you go down this kind of rabbit hole, and then if you're actually cooking, you've got a hobby, right? And then you don't go to the mall and, I don't know, buy shit you don't need.
Go skateboarding. Love skateboarders.
No,
Sorry.
skateboard, go for that. That's fine. Skateboard and cook. And then you also you start going to maybe the farmers markets, or you start getting an interest in all of that kind of thing. And so you have discussions with farmers. And so there's a whole, and you often find yourself walking out to kind of the supermarket. You start to get a little bit of a system in play. And it's really quite simple. It really is. So from quitting sugar, there's this wonderful kind of roll-on effect. Now, if you drill it down, you then start to go, well, you start to look at the farming practices and you take an interest in it. It's not something that's out there that's really removed from your existence. And you start to realise all those arguments about how you've got to do this mass monocrop kind of farming makes no sense. And you listen to people like Zach or Joel or yourself describing how we actually have enough food on the planet to feed the entire planet, despite what everybody thinks. And there are actually farming practices that can preserve our soil and actually also kill less animals, way less animals than we currently say, for instance, even a current vegan diet kills. And there's a lot of just sensible, like common sense stuff that really we only have to look to the way our great-grandparents used to do things to get an indication of what a good, sustainable life on this planet could look like. So then, of course, the piece with my autoimmune disease, right? So you drill down the layers of that and you start to hear information about how we got off track when we started sanitising the food chain and our existence. Now, I was really lucky. I grew up in the country, and so I've been able to heal from multiple stress-related autoimmune diseases, I believe, and reverse a lot of the markers because of the way I live, which is in nature, with dirt, in rocks and trees.
And lived, did you think? Do you think those first, formative
when
years
I grew up,
you were in the
absolutely.
sheep shit and the dirt and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I used to go and do my homework in the goat shed in winter because it was so cold, and I would just go and lie on the goats. And
like Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, very much. It was. And when it was really cold, we'd bring the goats inside because we had a potbelly stove, and it used to snow where we grew up, and the only heating was this potbelly stove and the goats. So, yeah.
Grab another goat, will you?
Oh, Mum, I'm cold. Grab a goat.
There's an expression about grabbing a dog. If you get cold, grab a dog. So it's not so far removed from the goat.
Yeah, well, we also had, so my and look, I'm really grateful for the fact that my mother was not a precious type like that, you know. She was always pulling things out of my brother's noses and ears that they'd stick up there, and never really thought much about it. So I sort of think that, and if you have a look, I mean, you only have to have a look at the way, you hear a little bit about, all these allergies stem from the fact that the children don't have a robust immune system. And you start to go, okay, well, that makes sense. Look at the way we're living, all these people sanitising everything. It fits logically into a sensible person's onion peeling journey, if that makes sense.
Well, that was not so much a summary, but that was a great way to put it.
Mix in a few metaphors.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's there's a great quote I wheel out quite often from Christos Miliotis, and he said that the solution to the world's problems is what we choose to eat and what's beneath our feet. The food on our plate and the soil on the ground.
Yeah.
And the soil provides the immunity. The biome, the Zach Bush show, and the food is obviously nutritious food as opposed to processed food, or even, what we call, what I don't really call it anymore, but fresh food. It's like, it's fresh because it's not frozen, it's not processed, but it's, what's on that stuff? How is it grown? And it's scary, some of the shit that they're putting on And I used to, as a farmer, I used to put stuff on cattle and sheep and on the soil and on wheat, and everything I grew had a layer or some layers of chemical on it, which I thought was a really normal thing. So what else?
It's all starting to play out as well. Just last week, I think there's been a big class action in the US against Bauer, which bought Monsanto, and so that's all starting to play out. And so here in Australia, our government, our Minister for Agriculture or whatever came out, no, there's no problems. Well, yes, except that, a major pharmaceutical company with access to the best lawyers in the world couldn't fight this case.
That's right.
It was watertight,
For them to decide, we get to settle this because it's going to go on forever, is absolute admission of guilt. And, it's a wonderful business model, and I've spoken to many people about this. I'm no lone ranger here, that, there's this amazing business model which makes sick people. And then there's another business model which dovetails into it, which fixes.
And what do you know? The same company owns both of them.
Yeah. Really? No. That's a coincidence.
Yeah. And yet we get worked up about all these other things, and sometimes some of the stuff, it's so simple. And, there's a lot of discussion about conspiracy theories and all that kind of going on around at the moment, and I have my eyes wide open to it. Like, I'm really nervous about some of the stuff that people are coming out with, but then there's also just common sense stuff like that. Like, the company that's selling us the chemicals also has the supposed fix. As you know, and you've probably got in your notes there, got something about mental illness coming up soon.
Of course I do.
I do. Well, I just,
Let's do that.
I happen to write a book about it. So. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. So anxiety as a disorder only entered the DSM, which is the main medical diagnostic tool for psychologists or psychiatrists in the US, Australia, and to a certain extent in the UK. So various, tics and behavioural traits were deemed disordered in 1980. Okay. Now, what do you know? It was 6 to 12 months after the first anti-anxiety drug was invented. Now, do you think that's a coincidence?
No. No, I don't.
And you could go, conspiracy theory. Let's just put it there as an interesting coincidence that anyone who out there has anxiety and finds themselves being given a pill, you might just want to start questioning it. And that's not to say that medication doesn't have its place. However, we also have to be very alive to these things. And bipolar disorder had exactly the same sort of entry into our lexicon as a disorder. It's been very much a drug-first history for anxiety disorders and for many disorders out there.
Well, I can say with experience, and I don't know, I've got permission to say this, but I'm going to anyway. My family, my brother had been ill for some time, and I'm medicated for many, couple of decades, and not in the world, not functioning in the world, and he, all credit to him and the courage that it took to do this. He took himself off medication, and I saw him yesterday, and I haven't seen him as well in 23 years.
Yeah.
And it's, there's a whole lot of stuff in that I don't need to go into.
There is.
But in terms of just there's the attitude of the people prescribing that. There's the helplessness of the patient and the family, who are often viewed as, ignorant and, you're not a doctor, you're not even a scientist, or, whatever their justification is, and we know best. And it's like, it's hard. It's a hard place to sit when there's a life in the balance. Well, who do you believe? Do you go with your gut? Do you go with your head? You look at the science. It is a really tricky one, and I've had to obviously be very careful because when I write a book about this kind of stuff, about the role of medication, I more just try to make people aware of where the vested interests lie, and so that they can make the choice, with their eyes wide open.
But one thing I would say to that is that also for anyone who is in that position, and look, there's very few people that have been touched by that very tricky decision, medicate or not medicate. Is this a disorder, or is this a sane person's reaction to an insane world? And we've got to bear all of that in mind, and all of it can be true. All of it can be appropriate. We can take medication, and we can also be aware that life has put us in a position where it is very, very difficult to navigate a sane path at times. And, you know, I think this plays out particularly evidently with ADHD and those kinds of disorders amongst children. And I recently have been exposed to a child who has been diagnosed with this and put on medication, and she doesn't want to take it. It makes her feel unwell and whatever. There's a whole bunch of things that have led her to that diagnosis and this position that she's in. But what I see is a world where we are so busy, and this is no one's fault. We are all part of a system, and here we arrive as poor, vulnerable humans trying to do our best, but we live in a world that is so busy, in a world that has so many expectations. The neoliberal system has put us into this system. And so you have children who are children, and they have energy to burn, and they have so many rules and restrictions. They are inside creatures. They are their attention completely fragmented. Their parents' attention is equally fragmented. And that's something that I look into in this book that is about to come out. There's a condition called continuous partial attention, and children are suffering that from their parents.
Continuous partial attention.
So with parents who are in a state of continuous partial attention, i.e. they're on their phones, what that means is that children are missing out on really important cues. Children develop psychologically, but also at a sort of an intellectual level through attention from their parents. So getting cues back from their parents where they behave, if they do something, their parents respond with eye contact. Now, they're not getting this. And in fact, studies have shown what kind of effect that's having on children around the world. And it's mammoth. It's the effect of parents' continual partial attention is bigger than children's own engagement with iPads and iPhone and technology. So you've got these kids who are having to exist, try to be sane in an insane world.
With parents who aren't present.
Yeah, and that's only one part of the puzzle. And it's not the parents' fault because we're all in it, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, medication, these kids are put on medication, which then creates a whole host of other problems. You know, I went on the Googles and had a look at the side effects of these medications, and it causes gut issues. And these, you know, this particular child in my life, she says that it just makes her feel sick. You know, and she finds it very difficult to eat at regular times, and of course that then leads to a range of cascading issues. So there is no quick fix, but I think there's ways that we can drill things down to quite simple truisms, and they're not all-encompassing blanket solutions, but they actually can be a path through. And what they can do. Hit us with a few. Well, for instance, the sugar thing. You know, you take sugar out, and I say this as somebody who now makes absolutely no money from encouraging people to not eat sugar, because all my profits from that's part of what I do goes to charity.
That was a wonderful thing.
So, you know, it sort of gives me an ability to promote the notion of not eating sugar with impunity.
You know, vested interest right there.
That's
Take
right.
a leaf out of Sarah's book.
Yeah, that's right. It gets.
You people, not your listeners, but some of the people we've been talking about.
Yeah, so you know, you do that, and it's actually a really clean, streamlined way to get rid of junk food, right? Yeah. So you cut out all processed food by just quitting sugar, and then what have you got left? Oh, you've got to eat whole food, meat, vegetables, good quality fats, etc., etc. So it really does kind of just streamline you into it. So there's a few going back to basics, going back to the way our great-grandparents used to live. Some of those things are actually, I think, some of the sanest, surest ways.
Simple.
So the other one, this is something that I absolutely live by, is ride a bike. Get rid of your car. So do you want to knock the sustainability issues, the ethical issues, and also the exercise factors on the head? do it in one by getting rid of your car. So I haven't owned a car in many, many years now. And you ride a bike, you keep fit. I mean, I've got friends, we all know these people, you might be one of these people listening, who drives to the gym, gets on an exercise bike for an hour. And then drives home, has a shower, drives to the office. And
having paid $38 a
and I'm like,
day for
I had this discussion at a forum in Melbourne once on flow, ironically enough. And I made this example, and the MC, a really great woman, she said, "Oh my God, I do that." And I said, "Well, why don't you just ride your bike to work and get it all done in one hit, you know, in a third of the time?" And then, of course, if you've got to go to the post office on the way there, if you've got to go to an after work, you know, it's all just flowy.
And often, given the traffic in Sydney, for example, getting there by bike is often
anything under 10 kilometres, it's more efficient by bike. And then you can also get on a train part of the way. It's wonderful.
It's actually quite, just on that one very quickly, is actually quite a big movement or tribe of bike riders, country farming, bike riding men and women out there. I haven't joined it yet. I'm not sure how I'd go down in lycra. But the good news is they do it. You know, they get out there and they're these big burly farmers and they're on their little pushies.
Yeah.
And, you know, they meet for coffee and it's just the same thing as here. They're just
there's a lot of stuff you can do, socialising, errands and everything by walking or riding. So there's that. And then the other thing, of course, is just don't go to the shops. So I say that because people often say, how do you be a minimalist? And I'm like, just don't go to the shops.
Don't get tempted or
So I have a hashtag on my socials, hike, don't shop. So whenever you're hiking takes a good half a day, right? You take your friends, your kids, whoever it might be, and you head out on a really great hike. And it just basically means you don't get to a shopping mall. And shopping begets shopping, right? So you go for a vegetable paring knife and you end up going, I might as well get some more towels and I might as well get this while I'm there. And you just come home with a whole heap of stuff that really you don't need. So
that's wrapped in plastic,
etc. You know, and I find that I will just put off going to the shops. So I think this time around it's been 12 months, but I'll do 15 months. I'll do then another 9 months where I literally don't go to the shops aside from toilet paper, frozen peas.
And what are the foods? So farmers markets,
markets, I go to Bondi markets. Wherever I've lived, there's always been farmers markets. Maybe it's just I live in particularly bourgeois suburbs, enclaves. However,
which is interesting. Like, shouldn't that be everywhere? Shouldn't it just be like normal?
More and more it's everywhere. I mean, nice. I travel a lot around country towns. I go to a lot of regional areas just with my hiking and things like that. And also I try to travel there with work. I try to focus or steer my work energies to more regional areas because I just love being in regional areas. And there generally is a farmer's market. They're popping up everywhere now. So and then there's bulk food stores. So I buy all of my grains, things like coconut, olive oil, coconut oil, tamari, whatever it might be. I buy it in bulk and I take my own containers. So I even take my own jars. Reuse even the paper bags, and I'll reuse them 4 or 5 times, rather than getting a new one there. As I say, I take my own jars. So
you were telling me the other day, I can't remember exactly what it was. You're at a restaurant or something and someone didn't finish their dinner and you said, can I take that home? And you took it home and turned it into a salad or something. What was
I do it all the time.
It was chicken bones or something.
Oh, yeah, I've taken fish carcasses. I've taken strangers' bones. Butter is the big one. So butter's a premium product.
Totally.
And a lot of restaurants and cafes have really good quality butter, right? The stuff that, don't come cheap. And people don't eat it all. So I'll just take it off people's plates. And it's often in really lovely foil,
Yep.
So I take it home, put it straight into the fridge, and then I eat it. And then the butter foils I use for greasing things.
The cake tins.
Exactly. I haven't bought butter in years. I'm actually serious.
I'm speaking with just on butter, a good mate of mine, Chris Eggett, on Saturday at Warhope, and he is one of 2, I think, Norco organic dairy guys. He's an absolute classic. So he won't be pleased to hear
he won't.
Been buying butter.
But maybe he ethically will be happy that I'm encouraging that. I'd like to see everybody eat it.
Yeah.
I think life is just made a hell of a lot better with a lot of butter.
Butter in it. I mean, butter doesn't go. It's just.
Bread for me is a vehicle for butter.
Yeah.
You know, it's
just you spread you're sort of like spreading bread on your
that's
your
right,
swag
on my
of
butter.
Tell me, Sarah, you have appeared on. I want to get to your books because there are a number of them. And before we do that, I just want to jump into did a bit of TV stuff in your 30s. Life, 30s. And would you do TV again?
I've never had a burning desire to have my mug on television. It's not something I ever sort of grew up wanting to do.
This will be on TV.
Oh, yeah. As I say, I didn't want it, but
you didn't know. Didn't you read the fine print on that?
Yeah. So, no, would I ever do television again? It's not my preferred medium. However, and I'm also pretty old these days.
No, stop it.
I am. There's no getting around that. But I've said this before, I would do television if I deemed it the most effective way to get a message I care about across to the most amount of people. And that's my dictum for everything I do now. There's been a number of opportunities and business ideas and things to do and be involved in that have crossed, my desk, this very desk that we're sitting at.
Yeah, totally.
Over the last couple of years, particularly since I gave away all of that money, and that was another turning point for me. That's
the I Quit Sugar enterprise, as it were.
Yeah. I sold off all the assets, and I continue to sell off books and give the money to charity projects, which I get engaged in, which is far more rewarding than making money and going to a shopping mall and spending it on shit you don't need. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? How do you want to spend
that vicious loop?
This your time in this mortal coil? So, television to me, I mean, there's very few things that I'm engaged in that I don't love doing. There's always some wonderful challenge, or there's people that you meet or whatever. So television it's not something I'd say never to, but it needs to be the most effective medium for that whatever that moment or that message might be. And so it's a case by case.
So
I don't know, have you got a TV show lined up or something?
I could have. I'm not telling. It's a secret. So let's get to the books, because they have been your in the last. First, we make The Beast Beautiful. When did that came out? In 2016.
2017.
17, yeah. So that's 3 years ago, and you've got one that's sort of rolling out this year.
August 30th. It comes out.
What were they? Why did you write them?
Yeah, so first we made The Beast Beautiful. Again, like everything I've done has emerged. So it was actually something I was writing. You know how I said I went up to Byron?
Yeah.
You go to Byron and you go and live in a army shed in the middle of a forest, and you go, right, I'm going to write my memoirs. Yes. And so I set off to write this book.
And how many years ago is this? So just to get the time frames.
That would have been 2010.
Okay, so a number of years before it actually came out.
Yeah. So in effect, it actually did take me 7 years. I think it was 2009 I first started sort of researching it and so on. And it went terribly, and I just didn't have a voice, and I hadn't arrived. I hadn't arrived philosophically with anything that resembled a polemic that I could share with the world. So, and it was just very unconvincing. I wrote 60,000 words and tossed the lot, and decided to not eat sugar, and the I Quit Sugar books emerged instead, which was wonderful. And then as I was working through the business and it was successful, I started to question things, and I got that itch again about what matters, and I thought I'll go back to that anxiety dialogue, and I actually felt very solid. I just reached a level of maturity. I just got older,
And were you familiar? I mean, I understand that you were familiar with that dialogue, because that had been part of your life.
So I was diagnosed with anxiety the first time when I was 12 or 13, and then I was diagnosed with a bunch of things. I was put on the equivalent, Prozac at 18, and then for obsessive compulsive disorder. Then I was diagnosed with manic depression, as it was called back then when I was 21, and I was medicated with a bunch of anti-epileptics and antipsychotics until I was 28, 29. I came off the medication, and of course I had various autoimmune diseases that are way connected.
Complicated by the medication?
No, connected to bipolar. Okay. So Hashimoto's and bipolar. I also had Graves' disease. And then various times throughout my life it would rear back up again. I'd have to go and get medicated, et cetera, et cetera. And to this day, I still have to read the signs. I modulate through diet, exercise, meditation.
What do you mean modulate?
Well, I describe it like carrying a shallow bowl of water around for the rest of your life when you've got a I guess a serious anxiety disorder, and you've just got to keep it in balance, right?
So you just got to be conscious and sensitive of
steady. It is a responsibility, and I find that actually a very enlivening way to see it. It's a responsibility to myself, to my time on this planet, because I have come very close at times to ending my life, and that's part of the disease. So I don't think I'm honouring the gift of life by getting myself so wobbly that I make that decision, and also to others. I want to be of service. I want to have relationship with others, and when I wobble, it makes it very difficult for the world around me to relate to me. And I want to be productive. I want to leave a legacy. So and my bipolar, as it is now called, enables incredible amount of productivity and creativity, and enables incredible ability to connect spiritually. It opens up consciousness, I believe, in many ways, as long as I modulate. So I do see that as a responsibility, and it's a burden, but it's a wonderful burden to bear, I suppose. So I do that, but then at times I don't manage it well. I get off kilter, and it gets bigger than me, and I have to go and seek help.
Who calls you out on that when that happens? Or not, you don't have to name names, but
no.
Are you called out? Is there?
There are people in my life who've done it, and they've not necessarily been close friends. They've been people who have been acquaintances, but they've been brave enough to approach me. Or they'll just be signals, and I'll go, all right, it's time. But then there's I've got a network of, Nico and Tim I would include in close friends who know when I'm not right. And I think just, I say this in First We Make the Beast Beautiful, that sometimes the only salve to anxiety is sheer years on the planet. Just doing the hard yards and learning, doing the work, learning and getting maturity to understand the bigger picture behind it all. So for me, as I get older, I know how to look after myself better and know when I need to get help. But, I greeted you at the door today, or you greeted me at my door.
I welcomed you to your house.
Yeah. Basically being really honest, I've not been great the last few weeks, and I've wobbled like a mad woman, and I have ways of coping, and so yes, back to your original question, I sort of had to go on this investigation anyway, because I was fed up with the storyline that I'd been trapped in. So I wanted to find I wanted to reframe my anxiety through a different lens, purposeful lens.
Is that by purging and then recollecting thoughts? Like that. Is that I haven't written a book, so I don't know what sort of the creative
not
process.
as direct as that. It's very meandering.
Yeah.
The way I write my books is and I've never known how to do anything in my life. I've just given it a stab and seen if it works. I suck it and see. But I go on the journey with the reader. So I write almost in real time. So I try this, I fail, I try this, I don't, then go and interview His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Then I go and then I go, actually that wasn't right. And then I do this, and then I look into the science and things, and then I go, actually, I think it's time to recircle back around to a spiritual perspective. And so
it's a real journey for the reader.
It's a journey, and then I do try to bring it together into an arc of sorts, so that we arrive somewhere, so we arrive somewhere, together.
Do you know where that is when you sit down to write a book? Do you know where the end is?
No. I don't. But by about 3/4 of the way through, I do. I don't know how I'm going to get there though, and that's why the last quarter matters. And then I go back and I layer. I layer. So I don't just write from the beginning to the end and then that's it. I then go back and I do a fair bit of moving around, and just so that it's succinct and reflects how the journey might work best for somebody else. Yeah.
Cool. You fashion it sort of for the...
Yeah. Do as I say and write, not as I did, is kind of what I bring to the party. And this latest book, which is called This One Wild and Precious Life, is a continuation of that journey in First We Make the Beast Beautiful. So that was an inward journey to better understand the purposefulness through a spiritual and philosophical and scientific lens of anxiety beyond the medical model. And then I take the journey back out because the world was calling me outwards, out beyond my own internal journey, out to the world to save it, basically.
Your contribution.
But I think the world's calling all of us out. And that's where James Hollis's notion of life, our soul is making an appointment for us with life. And that's what's going on right now. Yeah.
And the book, which is coming out, is this year, is how would you best describe in terms of someone, not that you're trying to do a spiel, but just to, I want our listeners to get a sense of what to look forward to.
So it's sort of... there's a lot going on. And when I first wrote it, it was really trying to navigate the climate crisis, which to me was the biggest thing that we could fathom, and it still is. But then, of course, the bushfires, then COVID, and then, of course, the Black Lives Matters protests happened before I could press go to the printer. Yeah, send.
Was that a good thing?
Oh my God, it was a curse, but then also it probably reinforced my message. Cool. And so by the time it comes out, oh, look, God knows, I've almost lost sight of it, to be honest, but that always happens at this stage. I literally sent the last race kind of update bit an hour before Charlie arrived, hence going for a swim in the ocean to recalibrate, hence wet hair. Yeah. So yes, it wasn't a good thing, yes and no, but it's been really, really challenging. So to go back to what's the book about, the book provides what I believe is a hopeful path forward through this clusterfuck. And it's not necessarily a salve, and it's brings us back to life. So it's a path that brings us back to our nature, back to what matters. And I argue that it's a disconnection from life, from all of that has led us to where we are today. So it's a path to reconnection. But the way I do that, because it's such an overwhelming behemoth to navigate, and I pull apart the neoliberal model, I use Nietzsche to break things down. I go through everything. But I do it by hiking around the world.
Yeah.
So
as the sort of the context or the sort of
the narrative thread, and so I follow in the footsteps of Nietzsche, where he wrote most of his seminal works that broke down sort of neoliberal thinking in the dawn of the industrial era.
When he followed in his footsteps,
literally the hikes that he used to do to keep himself sane.
Where was he doing that? Where did you do that as well?
Yeah, in a little town called Sils Maria in Switzerland. So
beautiful. Yeah,
and then but coincidentally, I was actually there in the footsteps of Heidi. Do you remember that book, Heidi? It was turned into a Disney movie starring Shirley Temple.
Okay.
But it was a book that was the first real non-picture book that I got given as a kid, and I've got it on my bookshelf in there. Dad wrote my name in it and covered it in plastic, As
he used to do.
Yeah. And Dad used to do all of that sort of stuff for us. And so this book I was fascinated by it, right? She grew up on goat's milk. And so I just felt this affinity. So I went off to this town to go to what's literally called Heidedorf in commemoration. But it was written in exactly the same era as Nietzsche was writing his stuff, by a woman, Joanne Spree, who was also disenchanted by industrialisation and capitalism. So she writes a book about a little child who gets sick from capitalism and gets shipped out to the mountains of Switzerland to frolic and be free. And so...
Wow, and find themselves again back to nature.
So that's one of the things that I explore. But then I go and hike where Wordsworth Williams Wordsworth and his sister used to hike. But I joined my favourite poet, David White, who's an beautiful Irish poet, and I hike with him and his wife in the footsteps of Wordsworth.
And that was in Ireland?
That was in the Lake District.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I remember. But that was like 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, something. I remember in your social media there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yes, I got very unwell.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you would have seen that video, and I actually went blue, and I had to be helped down the mountain.
Wow.
I go to Sierra Nevada, I go out to the desert, I do a bunch of different hikes, and so part of it is my sort of modus operandi. Hike and you don't shop. Hike, you reconnect with nature. When you reconnect with nature, you're motivated to, and you love it. You're motivated to save what you love. So these are some of the threads through the book.
So there's clearly no one silver bullet for any of this, but having
it's a way.
That's fantastic.
It's a way.
It's sort of like it's not dissimilar to, given that there are lots of tools and some suit more than others, but there's some principles involved. It's a bit like, and I take things back to regenerative ag for a reason that as a farmer, we have the tools in our toolbox we can use, and we use ones at different times. And the tools in the hands of an ignorant person can be really dangerous, in certainly in a farming sense. And but I think that's and it comes down to choice, doesn't it? At every moment, we have a choice. There's that instance between action and reaction where we can, and our decisions are going to be based on our past.
Yeah.
And Viktor Frankl, he said that, I'm going to quote him badly, but it was between every moment and the outcome, you have a choice.
The choice,
and that's your reaction.
There's a primitive response, which often is we can't control. It's like bang, we do this, and then there's that gap just before our next action, and that's the choice.
And that's freedom.
That's
what Viktor Frankl... Viktor Frankl wrote this book 9 days after getting out, being freed from Auschwitz, where he was spent 4 years doing hard labour. And it's called Man's Search
for Meaning.
For Meaning, yeah. And it's a lot about freedom, and that's his definition. It's your choice to decide how you're going to react.
And this came up in, I can't remember, was it yesterday's podcast with Tommy, but... And his scenario was he was being tortured, and his what he got, and he was a psychiatrist, wasn't he already? He had some pretty good foundational understanding of the way the mind works and behaviours and so on, and it was.
He's a teacher, isn't he?
A teacher. Yeah. But teachers know all about human behaviour, and he realised that that his tormentors, there's one thing that they could not take from him, is his freedom of choice.
Yeah.
I can react this way or that way to what's happening to me now.
Yeah, which links back into what we were saying before. Some of the simplest truisms are our way forward. Quitting sugar.
Let's not make
spending
it complicated.
Less, regenerative farming.
Totally.
And freedom being a choice as to how to react.
Well, thank you for putting the book together, which we are very much looking forward to reading.
Reserve your judgment till you've read it, Charlie.
What else have I got here? What's giving you... I
can't read your writing, so
I know. My mum says it's like... I use a fountain pen anyway, so that's like in code. And Mum says, it looks like a spider's jumped in an inkwell and run across the page. So what's giving you joy right now? Not like necessarily this very second, but in your life,
Which would have to be talking with you, Charlie.
Thank you.
What's bringing me joy?
Next question.
I love that. No, I love that question. I love that question because it's something that I've really had to delve deep into, and I think some people listening might relate to this because I am feeling very overwhelmed, very scared about what's happening in the world. And when you can't unsee the stuff, once you've actually looked into the climate science, once you start to really absorb some of the nuanced debates around all of this, and you can't unlearn it, you can't unsee
Can't
it.
forget
The
that,
truth is not pretty. So how am I going to choose to live the remaining 45 years on this planet meaningfully? Because really I'm going to have to find a way. And so I've been trying to think about really carefully about what brings me joy in a way that's not destructive, joy in a way that's productive, and can actually, again, equip me to be of most service. And that would be being in nature. It's my kind of main line to meaning and joy is just being in it. I don't have to do anything. So I've never been on a hike that I haven't loved and I haven't come back from, rejuvenated and feeling clear in the head and the heart. And ditto with, I've never jumped in the ocean and got out and gone, well, that was a waste of time.
Wish I didn't do that.
Yeah. So I do that regularly. So literally, as you know, I had 15 minutes to spare. I went across the road. I submerged and sort of calculated what might be 10 minutes before I sprinted back. And it's just that brings me joy. The other thing that brings me joy, I've started fostering. And
yeah, cool.
Yeah, so there's a little girl in my life, and it's hard, but I get to the end of, at the moment it's 4 days, a fortnight, and the school holidays.
Block. So it's 4 days in a row.
Yeah.
Block. Yep.
Yeah. And it's hard, it's challenging, but she leaves, and then that day I just realise I feel really good. I just feel good. I feel light, and I feel just clear, and so that brings me joy. So do my nieces and my nephews.
Why did you do that? Why did you decide, of all the things that you could do in your time, being as busy as you are?
Because that intimacy piece, and I missed the boat on motherhood for myself, which has brought me great grief, and it's a grief that will never leave me. And I actually write about this. It's another thread in this next book, because it sort of pieces into existence and joy and what matters and all of that, and also. I found out that there are 40,000 foster kids in Australia, half of whom are Aboriginal, and there's only 3,500 foster parents. So
what was that? What was it? 40,000 and
half are Aboriginal.
Yeah.
And 3,500 foster parents. So you do the sums.
Oh, yeah.
And then you ask, where are all these kids? And you know where they are? In motel rooms scattered across Australia on their own. So it's... and once you start to engage in all of this, again, you can't unsee it, you can't unlearn it, you can't block it out.
How does that work? I mean, because that's fascinating. And how does that? I mean, where is your foster child when? Well, not exactly
the rest of the time,
but they're at another.
She is currently, and she's currently with a second cousin of her mother's, but it's not a stable situation for her. So
the 10 days of the fortnight there, 4 days here?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But we don't, there's going to have to be changes there.
Do you see...
She's been in the care system since she was 1, and she's been to 7 schools.
At what age? 10? No.
She's just turned 9. 9.
Do you see a change? I mean, this fascinates me, but, in those 4 days, do you see, in some ways, it may not be dissimilar to broken families where 1 week's with dad and 1 with mum, or there's some sort of a thing. Often in those situations, children turn up to one parent, and depending on the dynamics, they're like ratty, and by day 4 they're okay, and then they've got to go back.
She's got multiple parenting that has kind of contributed to her small life. And so she has to absorb. Look, there's no playbook, no. I just witness how she responds to things, and I'm in awe. She survives. That's what she does. Everything goes through the survival lens. And so you watch her behaviour, and you can't be going, a child's not meant to behave like that. I just go, right, she's currently doing what she needs to get her needs met.
Doing her best.
And I go, full props to her.
You can't ask anyone any more than that, can you?
No. And I tell you what, I'm hats off to her. Like, I tell her constantly.
Does she teach you stuff?
Oh, God, yeah.
What like?
it's not so much. She teaches me mostly about the worst aspects of myself. Yeah, my assumptions, my generalizations, my impatience. Yeah.
Is that verbally? Does she call you out, or are you just there's a reflection?
There's a little bit of calling out. Remember, she's only young, but she's not stupid. She's smart. She calls me out. We have a little thing where if she's honest, we're to be honest with each other. So every now and then she'll go, "Hey," she calls me Auntie. Auntie, you know how you said I've got to be honest with you? Well, I think blah blah blah. And of course, when she says that, I have to honour.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Because through that lens, that innocent lens, there's clarity, isn't there? But they're seeing stuff as it is.
The other thing is that it's quite interesting. Children need boundaries, and a child who has been, sort of let loose.
No boundaries. She really needs boundaries. And when I give her boundaries, she responds really well. And it's all good. We make deals and she gets it, and life seems fair. Yeah.
And ultimate freedom is being bound, right?
Yep.
To be rendered choiceless, to use a Tim Brownism, is the ultimate freedom. And but flip side is she also binds me because all of a sudden I can go anywhere, I can go to a yoga class whenever I want to, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden it's like, I can't do that. And I'm a single parent when I'm with her, you know what I mean? Plus the restrictions are, I can't just fob her off to neighbours because there's protocols when you're a foster parent, So, yeah, it's...
Good on you for doing that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well,
the life that she will live.
We'll have to see where it goes. It's early days with her and I, but it's, she's. I think she'll be sticking around. Yeah.
I have a quote, and I bang on about it quite often, but it's one I think about every day. Is our job as parents, foster parents, is to prepare our children to leave us.
Yeah.
And that might be 16, it might be 18. Generally around there. And if they're not ready and prepared for the world, it's our fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have that responsibility. And that simple
Yep.
premise, it's like, okay, if that's my reference point, might have to do some work.
Get your own ego out of the way.
That's it. And there's a time around that, and there's no excuse for access to information, activity, behavioural change if necessary, any of those things. I just think...
Yeah, there's also, I think, one of the big rods that parents create for their backs, and I say this as an observer of many friends who've, had all kinds of different children and have different types of parenting styles, but is this idea, I think there's this kind of sense of guilt and whatever that parents feel, and they feel that they've got to be liked by their children. They want to be loved by their children. They want to be liked by their children. Our parents didn't need that. They didn't see that was part of what they had to get from their children. And there's this sense that children, that parents want to get that from a child. And that's part of, we've got to, I sort of feel that if we go by your edict, going back to a simple edict, no. It's the other way around. You have a job, and that is to prepare the child to leave you. And if you muddy that with thinking that you've got to be liked and everything, you're not doing your job,
Totally. And, tough love is a wonderful thing. It's about...
And boundaries.
Totally boundaries. And there's so much wonderful stuff about this. And,
anyway, I shouldn't actually... I've got to be very careful because I haven't been a parent for that long. But I think it's an interesting conversation that we need to be having as a society.
Totally.
Because a lot of parents do feel alone in that aspect of the debate.
But what you're doing is something that not many people do, and that your experience with that is absolutely valid. So don't ever excuse yourself for saying it as you feel it to be. That's Yeah. Thank you. Don't do that, okay? I'm telling you. So there was something about Ken Robinson. Do you ever heard of Ken Robinson?
No.
You would love him. He one of the most popular TED talks. I know that's banned around everywhere, but he's got two, and it was the first one, and I can't remember what what his he's just a bloody clever bloke. He's a poem and lovely guy. He's written a couple of books, and this story. I'm going to spoiler alert, but in the TED talk he talks about. We were talking about it before about ADHD and sort of children not fitting in, that sort of thing. And he told a story about some. I think they were his clients, but anyway, so he suggested. That's right. He suggested that these people having trouble with their child go to it was him. I'm bugging the story up now. I can't remember if it was him or a colleague. No, it'll be in the notes, yeah, for sure. But there was a child that was having so-called problems in the world, and the parents didn't know what to do, and they went to this guy and they were talking about it, and this kid was sitting there and, looked really normally going, no, this kid's just out of control and we can't, it just doesn't think and not learning, and it's just anyway, he said, come outside, and we went outside and I left the child in the room, and there's a window, and he just had some music playing, and he waited 5 minutes and he said to the parents, come over here and have a look, and they looked, and the child was dancing around, and he said, your child doesn't have a problem, she's a dancer.
Yeah, right.
That's her thing. And then from then they went, oh my God, that's it, because she couldn't sit still in class. That her resonance, her being was around about music and play and
don't you like that idea of exiting the room? Like, there's so many symbolic gestures. Stand back from the scenario, then look at it through a different window.
Totally.
And like
and the child was in its natural state.
And bound within a room,
totally, yeah,
where there was one thing that she had to concentrate on. It happened to be something that resonated.
Literally. And then she went on to be the, I'm not sure what you call it, the head ballerina or whatever of the Royal Ballet or something, like a fascinating story. And it was just because this guy acknowledged and understood that we just need to accept them as they are and not push them into, you've got to sit down in class for 8 hours a day and learn this and do your maths and whatever else. It's like, let them be. And in the world of Steiner, we say in the first 7 years of their lives, you love this, it's about being in nature and being one with nature, one with yourself, and you are part of nature. So it's your relationship, it's eating the bloody sheep shit, it's understanding,
doing your homework,
listening to the owls, hugging trees. What was that?
Doing your homework, sitting on goats.
Totally, absolutely. Talking to the spiders, you know, and that's really important stuff. And if once we have a relationship in those years with nature and ourselves as part of nature, we can handle anything.
Yeah.
You know, we can. You'll have our ups and downs, but that's the foundation of man.
And this is a word that I explore in the book is fending. Because in nature you have to fend, and you have to adapt and mould in and around the rocks. You've got to find ways to crawl up and over. You've got to find a fix for something, you know. You sort of, and as kids that's what we used to do. We'd find, I need to tie these two sticks together. We'll use some, you know, some straw or whatever. And so fending is something that it really does tap us back into source. It's creative, it's movement, natural movement of the body, and it creates a certain type of completeness, a satisfaction. And, you know, I cite a bunch of studies to back that up. But yeah.
It's adaptive. Again, back to regenerative ag, it's not about adoption of practices and going prescriptive industrial farming, spray it then, do it now. It's adapting practices to your business, your headspace, your landscape, whatever it is, the season, being flexible, focusing on what
and that's fun. It's creative. It's fending. It's being agile. It's you know, I think that's it's about freedom. It's
treading the thin line between chaos and order.
Yeah. All the theories.
Sarah, you know what? We have banged on for
We've got no view either now. We've just got lights.
No, I've got lights. That's a nice view too.
Yeah, it is.
Sarah, thank you so much. We will furnish our listeners with the show notes and links and all those sort of things. And it's been an honour and a pleasure to be in your home, looking at your view and having the chat. It's really cool.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Pleasure. No, thank you. What a wonderful experience I had just speaking with Sarah there in that non-disclosed location somewhere in Bondi. so insightful, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into this one, Wild and Precious Life. Her latest book was only released a few weeks ago. So thanking Sarah for her time and that inspirational chit-chat we had. Now, talking about inspirational chit-chats, next week, the legend, regenerative farmer and all-round good guy, Martin Royds. Martin is that interview was wonderful. We did. He was one of my earlier victims. 2019 May last year at the Nutrisoil Sustainable Abundance Conference. I did a talk there and shared the stage with Joel Saddleton, and Martin was on deck, and we had a fantastic yarn. So that's something I hope you can be looking forward to next week.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.